Welcome to Real Estate and Murder, a podcast about real estate and murder.
I am Amy Brockbank.
And I am Sarah Brager. We are both licensed real estate agents in the state of Utah who have a common fascination with true crime.
We are here to tell you stories of murder amongst the real estate community. It might be an agent, it might be a client, it might be an undetected serial killer.
When it comes to real estate crimes, some are predators and some are prey.
We just want to issue a trigger warning. The content of these cases can be difficult to hear from time to time, and please listen with care.
Are you ready to get into it?
Yes.
All right, so Amy, it's time to introduce our case.
Yes, our fourth one. Can you believe it?
I really can.
You can. Who knew we'd get to number 4?
And here we are, but tell us the title. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about the mysterious disappearance and death of Charles Morgan, an escrow officer from Tucson, Arizona.
Ooh, deep ties to real estate,
Deep ties.
which we're going to get into. And Amy, before I introduce our special guest,
You guys were so excited to have a guest.
we have a special guest.
I know. We've never had one before.
Well, it is.
It's
Episode.
episode 4, but
Well,
still.
I'm excited to
Case
introduce our
4.
guest. Case 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
There's a lot
Amy,
of episodes.
is it time? Do we introduce our special guest?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, audience. I would love to introduce to you a longtime friend and a real estate genius, Justin Stratton. Say
Hi.
hello, Justin.
Hello. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
I
and
know you're excited to hear all about how this escrow officer got murdered.
This is a crazy case from the little bit of research I did
It is.
to prepare for this.
It made
what
it
went on and
Oh, it's so much fun to talk about it. We're going to have a good time. So, Justin, we asked you to be here today because you have something in common with Chuck Morgan,
yes,
which is
yeah.
not your pulse
Yeah.
because you're still here. And unfortunately, Chuck is not, right? But you have something really important in common with him. And that, besides the fact that you're both husbands and fathers, you are a title officer.
that's right. And who would have thought that being an escrow officer was a dangerous profession?
Yeah.
Well, it
But
might
today-
not be.
We might learn that it might be.
Yeah, it might not be unless you decide to hook up with the mob or the CIA.
True.
And then really anything becomes super dangerous at that point.
Yeah.
But we're going to refer to Chuck because the way that the story is told in all of our sources as an escrow officer. So, but they're the same thing, right? In theory.
Title and escrow, I guess is what she's asking.
Or officer and officer.
Yeah, they really do get used interchangeably. That, oh, you work at a title company, which is true. I do work at a title company. There is a distinction on our end of things between a title officer and an escrow officer. A title officer is the one who does the searches at the county records, the public records, prepares the actual
The
title
researcher.
report.
Okay.
The researcher. And then the escrow officer is the one who interfaces with real estate agents and buyers and sellers and handles the paperwork and the transaction itself and gets it closed, funded, recorded, and all of that. So there is a distinction, but quite often they are interchanged within the industry.
Well, I had no idea,
I
actually.
didn't either.
So it's like the executive chef and the sous chef, but everyone calls them both chef.
Correct.
Okay. We learned something new.
I know, we did.
How exciting. All right. Well, I do know a little bit about you because we've been friends for a long time.
Yes,
And I believe that you were previously an agent, right? You sold and you were a broker.
I was.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I was. I have a real estate broker's license. It's inactive. They can't be active in the state of Utah at the same time as an
Sure.
escrow officer's license, but I did. I ran an office with 21 agents. And I've sold real estate and I've helped buyers and sellers and took care of all of that along with doing some lending and
All of it, which
all of it.
makes you a very well-rounded expert in real estate. It really does.
Yeah.
And I know when I was brand new as a real estate agent 5 or plus years ago, right? I would call you all the time and be like, friend, help me understand this part. And you would. You're excellent at it. So thank you.
I love that you have all aspects, knowledge of all aspects of the
It's
transaction.
really helpful.
Because I think that really helps your clients too.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I like about being where I am is I understand what's happening for real estate agents. I understand what's happening for loan officers, for builders because of that experience. And then I'm a great resource. And really that's what I want to be, is a great resource to my clients. When they have questions, they know they can come and get answers. When they're not quite sure how to make a transaction work, or if there's issues with death,
Yeah.
trust,
Divorce.
those
Sure.
things that they know that there's somebody that has the expertise, knows the background on what it's going to take and how it's going to affect your transaction.
Right. Yeah. I'm a living testament. I have asked for that advice many times. And
Well, and you say you want to be a great resource, but maybe you're second guessing that as we asked you to join us.
To come on a podcast.
Well, the other thing I do know about you is that you run a tight ship over at Meridian Title. That's where you work, right?
Yes. With I have 2 assistants, and the 3 of us we really don't do a division of labor like some people do. We just all work on everything.
Sure.
They're very well rounded as well, and it helps to make sure things get taken care of promptly and they get done right. And that's the most important part, as you're probably well aware within the title side of things, that things are done right.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And that they're done on time, because there are deadlines, of course, in real estate transactions, but there's also questions that have to be answered, or parts of the transaction that have to take place as quickly as possible. So when you get those answers back right away, it helps smooth things over.
Well,
you know,
you got to make sure like the right person is actually selling the property, and the right person
so much
can
goes into
buy
it.
the property.
Yeah, a lot goes into it. So, all right, we talked a little bit about your background and experience. And so just so that everyone knows or is reminded, on our show, we always tie in a little bit of education, right, into the murder that we're discussing at the same time. And we were super excited about the idea of having an escrow or title officer. I will still probably interchange them without even meaning to, but we have the chef here, right? Because if you look at this case and you can really understand what escrow is like the purpose of it and how it works, you have a much deeper and a better understanding of this case in general.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And
it's so crucial.
What was going wrong?
Yeah, exactly. So I like that we get to add this element, because in all the resources that I listened to or watched, which were excellent, by the way, all of them were fantastic, but they're not all necessarily in the industry, in the real estate industry, right? So you can reference that he was an escrow officer, but without really necessarily knowing what the day-to-day of that is like, you might not understand how deep this crime runs.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
All right. Well, Justin, it's time, I think, to get a little education on real estate. I've already gotten some. So let's go on. I mean, do you mind if we just ask you a couple questions?
Oh, go right ahead.
Before we get into our case, and then we'll dive in because it's fun. All right. So we've referenced escrow and title. What does escrow mean in a real estate transaction?
Sure. Well, first of all, escrow it's actually a legal term, and it's really simply just a third party. In real estate, that's the third party who holds money, who holds a signed deed on behalf of a buyer and seller. And then at the agreed upon time, they transfer the property to the buyer, release the money to the seller. Now, a lot of times people are like, well, do I really need that? And I think the simplest example on why that's important is, imagine that you're a seller about to sell a property worth $1 million. And you tell the buyer, hey, give me $1 million and I will go record a deed at the county recorder's office that transfers the property to you. Seems completely reasonable from a seller's standpoint.
Sure.
But the buyer looks at that and says, well, wait a minute. No, you go record the deed and then I will give you $1 million.
Of course.
Yeah.
Who goes first?
Who goes first?
Yeah.
It's a catch-22. They're both like, no, you go first and then I'll do my part. But you can see how they both have an interest in this being done. And that's where an escrow officer, a title company, comes into play, is they kind of become that middleman that takes the money, takes the deed that's been signed, and then gets it recorded and gets the money transferred. And both the buyer and seller are comfortable with this third party who's licensed and insured to make sure that it all happens at the right time and in the right way.
Oh, that was a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
I mean, which you're the professional, so of course you had the perfect way to describe it. But so my next question is then why is escrow so crucial to the real estate transaction? Now, you just explained it a little bit more. So, but why is it so important in the transaction overall?
Sure. Every buyer wants to know what they're buying and that they're actually getting what they think they're paying for. And it's a little counterintuitive when you think about a seller. A seller actually wants the same thing because it reduces their legal liability down the road. And so as you get a title company and escrow officer involved, we do a title search. We search the public records to make sure it is well aware what is on title to that property, who actually owns it, who is the legal owner of the property, what liens there are. Most common lien, of course, is a mortgage. Most of us have a mortgage on our home, but there can be other liens against the property if you don't pay your income tax to the state or the federal government, they can put a lien on your property.
Right.
Judgments attach automatically to property. People think they do something in court and a credit card company sues them and they owe them money, that's what it is. It's fine. It's no big deal. Well, that's not true. It actually shows up on the public record through the court system and it attaches to your property.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can't just go bankrupt your credit cards and be like, but I still have a house.
Not necessarily.
To sell it. Right.
Maybe you can, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of legal things that go on, but
Sure.
there's one of the ones we see quite often are unpaid child support.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That actually attaches to the real estate.
Wow.
And we want to make sure those things are all taken care of. So when the buyer takes ownership of that property, there are no extraneous liens that shouldn't be there that they're not accepting as part of their purchase.
Right. And the term that we use in real estate is buying it free and clear.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right?
A clean title.
A clean
Yep.
title.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How I really am learning all that
Yes.
stuff. I mean, like I know this stuff, but the
Therapy
way
for
that you're
you. Yeah.
describing it is so clear that
Yeah.
it's like excellent reminders.
So a lot of stuff is in the news where someone will sell a property, particularly land or whatever, and it won't actually be the real seller. Like how much fraud do you come across in your business?
Well, I don't want to scare anybody,
Yeah.
but it's more than you would think that you actually do come across. What you're talking about is seller impersonation fraud.
Sure.
And fraud in real estate is generally, it's unfortunately becoming fairly prevalent in the industry.
Right.
And we'll talk about seller impersonation fraud, and then I'll mention another type of fraud
Yeah.
Okay.
that we see. And that's a case where typically it's a raw piece of land. That's the normal way this happens. And the property has no liens against it. It's free and clear
Yeah.
of any mortgages. And somebody reaches out to a real estate agent and says, I want to list my lot and I want to sell it. And an agent says, great, that's what I do. I'd love to list it for you. Great. They correspond all over email. And the agent lists it, puts it up for sale. They get a buyer. The seller says, well, I'm out of state. I don't live in Utah. So just send me the deed and I'll get it signed and notarized and send it back to you. Which is not completely uncommon in real estate.
Yeah.
We do that. We have sellers out of state.
Yeah.
So there are some red flags that we look for. One is raw land. Two is no liens, no mortgages,
Yeah.
right? We want to look for those things because those are kind of red flags that maybe something isn't the way it seems.
Yeah, just another level of digging your researchers will do.
Exactly.
Your title officers. We'll use right terminology
Yeah,
now that we know.
Well, and they put a lot of it back onto us to say, okay, you need to verify this. How can you verify that the land, these are the correct sellers? You'll check with the agent who's listing it. How do they know them personally? What in their interactions do they have? Do they have phone numbers for them? Did they sit down and physically sign the listing agreement, or was it all electronic?
Sure, yeah.
And maybe I'll use one quick example.
Yeah, for
Please
sure.
do.
Please do.
This was several months ago. It was probably middle to end of last year. And an agent had given me an order to open up a title report on 2 lots that were being sold here in Utah County. And opened up the title reports, got it all back. It's great. Well, soon after, we get contacted by another title company that says, "What are you doing? We have these we have these orders open. Our agent gave it to us, right?" Well, I should give the background on my agent that I was working with, my client I was working with. I've known him for 10 years. I've done a lot of work with him. The lots he was listing are actually just around the corner from my house.
Oh, wow.
So very close to me. And I know who the family who owns them, as does he. He lives around the corner from me.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
he physically had the papers signed. Well, this other agent had never met the quote unquote seller, was trying to list the property. As you know, the MLS, can you list the same property twice on the MLS?
No.
No, you get a little pop-up,
Yeah.
right, that says, hey, wait a minute. And so that happened. And it came back, and we were able to, of course, to say, hey, listen,
Yeah.
this was
Your client's
signed
fate.
by a seller.
Our client's
Yeah.
will.
And how do you say that?
Wow.
Kindly to an agent, and
Yeah.
they realize they're losing this transaction. Interestingly enough, it happened twice while these lots were listed.
Wow.
Interesting. So someone had targeted those lots specifically.
Some had
Yeah.
found them on the county records,
Yeah.
noticed there was no loan, and thought, I'm going to sell these and then I'll just get the money wired to my accounts.
Wow.
And typically what happens, of course, they're not the real seller. The names aren't correct. They either have a notary wherever they're at that is less
On
than
their
honest.
team.
Yeah.
On their side.
Or
Illegal.
they've
Illegal's the word.
stolen a notary stamp.
Sure.
Sometimes they do it out of the country and pretend like they got it done at an embassy. And they've stolen a seal from an embassy or recreated a seal that matches an embassy.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things that go on, but they send it back and it looks legitimate.
Yeah.
To you or to me, even as an escrow officer, I'd see that as legitimate. It's recordable.
Yeah.
And so you really have to be careful, because if you go through that, you can wire money out, transfer property, and the seller actually never sold it.
Wow. I do have a quick anecdote, really. I'll be really fast, but
yeah.
it will support the story right there that it happens, right? That it happens more frequently. So as an agent, I do take what we call like cold calls or leads that are usually internet sourced, right? So I pick up my phone and it's a gentleman who's looking to sell his lot of lands. And I pull them up on the county records. I just looked at the address. They're legitimate lots that are up in Ogden. Okay, this looks good. And I asked him for his name, of course. And he says, Bob Fish. But this man had the thickest accent of some kind of foreign origin that I had ever heard in my life. And I was like, Bob Fish. All right, odd. And I just got this sense. So I started asking him questions, one of which was, hey, I see these lots. I'm happy to run some comps, which we call comparables, right?
Yeah.
But in order for me to get started on this, I'm going to need you to sign some paperwork and include a copy of your license. Phone call ends.
Oh.
Bob Fish was attempting to do exactly what you're talking about. They had targeted some lots that were empty, not being used, and tried to get an agent to agree to sell them.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Interesting on that. On these lots that I worked on, there was an ID given.
No way.
Fake ID with all of the information of the real seller.
Wow.
Somewhere on the dark web, they had gotten a hold of his license, changed the picture, but everything else was the same. So they're getting really good.
Sophisticated.
Oh
That's like
Very
next level.
sophisticated in what they're
It is
doing.
next level.
There's one here in Orem where the lot sold, transferred
Sure.
to a buyer, and you may have heard about this one.
Yeah.
The owner of that lot, the real owner, drove by and there was a house being built on his lot.
No way. Oh my
Wondering
gosh.
What is happening?
Yeah.
What is going on? Somebody is building on the wrong lot. No, what they found out was there was seller impersonation fraud, and the title company had handled the transaction, sold it to the buyer. And the buyer got their plans, had a deed, right, that was recorded, and started building a home.
So let me ask you this, and I know
what you're going to ask.
none of us are lawyers,
Yes.
but what recourse?
Who's holding the bag?
Yeah, who's responsible? Is it the title company? Is it a court issue for the decide? Like, what ends up happening?
It really does become a legal issue where there are
Right.
attorneys involved trying to unravel
The steps.
the steps. A lot of title insurance coverage does cover fraud, so there is title insurance coverage as well that takes it. But it ends up going through attorneys trying to battle it out with who you can imagine this cute family building their new home.
I know all the money that
Right.
they've already
Goodness.
put into
Right,
plans
so and a
everything.
lender that has
Yes.
loaned money for that new loan, they have an insurance policy
Oh
as
my
well.
goodness, the
So
hole
it's
goes
really
so
a messy
deep.
situation.
Yeah.
And they have to work through it and see if there's any compromise on the opportunity for the seller to actually sell it to the buyers, but I don't know the outcome of that one, where it ended up.
Yeah.
But it does become very messy with attorneys involved and too many
goodness.
issues to deal with. Really.
Justin, I am not going to lie. No offense, but I did not think that this interview with you would be the most scandalous part of this story. I knew it would be interesting, which is why we asked you to come, but I didn't know it was going to be so scandalous.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have to have you on in a later case, because one of the subjects that I've already put down on our list is a seller impersonation case out of, I believe, California. There was a murder involved, and then they're trying to sell the land. So
Yeah.
fascinating.
Absolutely.
That feels like it might be a little bit of a big responsibility, though, right, Justin? I mean, do you sleep okay at night?
Sometimes we have trainings on these things, and I'll be honest, it gives me a little bit of anxiety when we talk about these
Yeah.
things that are going on in our industry. And really the key is to have a title company that you work with who has processes and procedures in place to try to prevent this fraud from happening.
Yeah.
And at Meridian, we have extensive processes. One, I would tell every real estate agent, just like Sarah shared, trust your instinct. Sarah's instinct, her spidey sense went off.
Yeah.
And she thought, something doesn't seem quite right. And that's one of the things they tell us. If you are having thoughts that something doesn't seem quite right, look into it more. Ask more questions, right? As soon as you ask for that ID, click, he hung up. And we do similar things. And that's why we'll talk to the agent and say, well, Sarah, have you met with this person before? Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a good family friend. All of a sudden we're a little safer on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we look at it. Another thing we do that's really simple to do is just look at the last vesting deed or warranty deed that's on the county records. See where the tax notices are being sent.
Oh.
If it's being sent here locally, you may just go knock on their door.
Oh,
And say,
Excellent
hey,
point.
Bob, I talked to you on the phone about listing your lots. I just wanted to come introduce myself.
Yeah.
And Bob goes, who are you? And what are you talking about? I'm not selling
I'm
my
calling
lot.
the police.
Right?
Yeah,
And
it's
all of a
actually
sudden,
Bob Fish.
You're able to tell Bob Fish somebody was trying to impersonate you and sell your lots.
So be careful.
So you're
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah.
So it's really important to understand those things and to do just that extra step and make sure your title company is doing that extra step to try to. Now, is that a foolproof way? Of course not. They're
Sure.
getting more and more sophisticated with the things they're doing.
Sounds like it.
As we get more sophisticated with what we do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way that criminal activity works, right?
That's true.
They get
Yeah,
smarter
it
as
is.
we get
It
smarter.
develops over time, sure. Well, Justin, you don't know this yet, but Amy and I, at the end of every case that we do, give like a personal takeaway from the story.
Yeah.
And everything you just said totally supports mine. So that's going to be a real easy takeaway at the end. That's great to really good to know. All right. So this case that takes place with Chuck Morgan it happens back in the 70s. So I know I asked you this question in advance. I was like, I just want to know. And it was kind of a cheeky question. And Justin came back with a fantastic answer. So tell me just a little bit, how has real estate, the transaction process changed since the 70s? Like what was happening back then shouldn't be able to happen now.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about how it's changed since the 70s.
Sure. Some of the things that happen have been legislative. There have been law changes about fund transfers, right? One of the things you may run into is if you ever go to your bank and tell them you want $10,000 in cash, they're going to make you fill out a form and they have to register that form actually to say somebody's taking this much cash out.
Yeah.
And it's all about trying to identify criminal activity. That's what it's about, right? And now typically we don't take cash at a title company. You can't come in with cash to pay for your property. I have had somebody walk in one day with a briefcase
We've both had that
that
too.
had $50,000 in cash in it, right? And I was like, sorry, I can't. One, I don't want to be liable for that.
Yeah.
If you didn't count it right and I don't count it right and it's $10,000 off, I don't want to be on the hook.
You just
So
slowly
we-
back
we-
away.
yes, exactly, right. So we typically receive wires now. So the wire goes
Right.
through the Federal Reserve banking system to go through, and they actually run a search on the names and the sources where that money's coming from to see if any of them have been flagged. Either there's sanctions against, a person. So we hear about sanctions in the news, right? People in Russia are being sanctioned, right? We heard that with this Russia-Ukraine war that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they do it is they watch these transfers to see if any of those people have been flagged as somebody who shouldn't be receiving money or sending money. Unfortunately, sometimes innocent people's names that are very common could be caught in
Bob
that.
Fish.
Bob Fish. But we can work through that and figure out and make sure it's the right people. So that's been a big thing is the laws relating to money and how we receive it. And then additionally, obviously, with technology, we're a lot better at identifying people and verifying their driver's licenses and their,
Unless they're fake.
Yeah, unless they're fake. And they can be good. But that's gotten a lot harder to do, right? All the holograms in your driver's
Right.
license.
So the one you were referring to is a copy of it, right?
It was just
So they were hoping that would slide by.
right. Exactly.
Sure.
They were hoping it would slide by. And the same thing with business entities, right? And in this case, specifically, it deals with a lot like trusts and business entities. Well, all of that information now with technology is available through the states. And you can check and see who are the authorized signers, who should be signing documents on behalf of an entity. And then you check their driver's licenses and you do those things to make sure you're getting the right person signing.
So are states sharing information then? Like, it's not like someone in California can get away with it in a transaction in Tennessee or something. Like
So-
they're sharing the same database information.
Well, if it's an entity, an LLC, right? A lot of LLCs own properties, especially commercial properties. We would get on to California's, the Secretary of State's website. A lot of times that's where it is. Look up their corporation's records. And usually there's a fee and you can get a copy of the filed
Okay.
reports, the
Yeah.
information.
Okay.
So we're able to get it
Yeah.
just directly from their websites, from each individual state. So you can
Okay.
make sure, well, who's listed with the state as a member of the LLC, a manager of an LLC, or the president of a corporation, or the treasurer
Right,
of a corporation. So you say, oh, it says that Sarah Brager is the manager of this
Yeah.
company. Okay, when Sarah comes in, I'm going to verify a driver's license. Government issued ID, that's what we need, right? Driver's license, passport, that's typically what you're using. And you're looking to see if they're fake. And sure, they can be counterfeited. There's no doubt, right? There's
Sure.
some sophisticated people out there, but
Mhm.
that's a lot of work. It's a lot of money to do those things, and most are just trying to email you a copy and let
Yeah.
it slide under and hope you're not paying attention.
Okay.
Right.
So that's made a huge difference. And of course, with that same technology, fraudsters are using it
Of course.
to become more sophisticated and,
Right.
and try to do it. So we're always reviewing our processes, and I'm sure they are. How can we trick somebody differently than we are now? We're
Sure.
getting caught the way we're doing it. People are understanding that, oh, I'm not the real seller. So what do we do? So we just keep working on those procedures to make sure we're dealing with the correct people and we have the right ID. It's real. It's not something fake.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gives a lot of reassurance to the public. You know,
It gives a lot of
that-
reassurance to me too.
Yeah, well, and you just
No,
want
I
to
just
make
mean
sure.
I'm still
Yeah.
learning how thorough these processes are. It's amazing
This is
to
why
learn
you
how much
pay
it
the
is.
professionals that you choose.
That's
to
a great
pay.
point.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I've got one more question for you
Sure.
before we jump in. So, and this will make sense to our audience in just a little while here, but can you explain to me what a blind trust is?
Yes. So a blind trust, it's simply a trust. We hear about trusts all the time. There's a lot of people out there have a trust. They put their home in their family trust. That's just typically a revocable trust that you set up for your family finances, your
Right.
real estate, your assets, right? And a blind trust simply means the trustor or the person who sets the trust up and the beneficiary or the one who's going to get benefit out of the trust. By blind, it means they don't actually know what's going on in the trust or what assets are there. So that's the simple definition of what a blind trust is. There's nothing illegal or nefarious about a blind trust. They get used quite a bit in things. If you ever hear about a politician who goes into politics, they get elected to Congress or the president, and then you hear about them putting their assets into a trust.
Sure.
That's typically a blind trust. They can't have access and control what's happening with those assets
Okay.
because
Yeah.
it could be a conflict of interest with what their political.
Okay, it was in the news a lot with the last presidency
Yes.
because
So-
he came into office with a lot of real estate assets.
Okay.
Yeah. So when those assets get managed by the trustee of the trust, and that trustee will distribute those assets to the beneficiary as outlined in those trust agreements.
Okay.
So it's not anything that's necessarily bad
Right.
or illegal, but like most things, they can be used for criminal
Used for evil.
enterprises.
Yeah.
For evil.
Wow. Okay, that's
Okay.
fascinating. Well,
Well,
thank you so much.
I know,
for
we're both
sharing all of
like,
that.
thank you.
And it's going to really help us explain the rest of our case.
I think it's going to help our listeners kind of really understand Chuck Morgan more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Justin, you're going to stay with us for the
Yeah.
first person, right? I'm excited for you to hear what we're going to do. I do, just really quickly, before we jump into the details of the case, I do just want to give a trigger warning. As always, we want to be respectful to the subjects of the case and the things that they experienced. So we do want to give a trigger warning for this case about suicide. We do reference it, bring it up multiple times throughout the story and with multiple subjects in the case. So we want to be sensitive to that, but also tell the story in kind of the way it was told at the time of the occurrence, right?
Yes.
So they might not have been as sensitive to the impact of that type of discussion back then. So, but trigger warning there. So, Amy, all right, get your shovel ready.
I'm ready. I'm so excited for this.
We're gonna dig deep into this case, the disappearance and death of Chuck Morgan. So,
Yeah.
Amy, will you start our story off with a little bit about Chuck Morgan's life?
Yeah, so Charles Curtis Morgan was born on March 16, 1938 in Everett, Washington, to Leonard and Doris Morgan. Some records indicate that Charles had a younger brother named Michael, who was born in 1946. Sadly, his brother Michael passed away at the age of 12. Charles would have been 20 years old when he lost his brother. Chuck married Ruth on October 8th, 1958 in Idaho. And it's this little town. I mean, I know Idaho pretty well, but it's a town that I'd never heard of.
Okay.
And I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I'll just spell it for our audience. It's Kootenai. So however you decide to choose to, anyway. They had 4 daughters, Megan, Erin, Heather, and Colleen. His coworkers say that he was very shy and quiet but smart. He was a little naive and often overworked himself, sometimes to the point where he would have a mental breakdown once a year. So, I mean, that's pretty consistent. You're yearly having a mental breakdown, but
That he was very consistent.
oh shoot!
Although now
bless
we
his heart.
understand kind of the responsibility that it is.
Of course, he's overstressed. Chuck died on June 18th, 1977, at the age of 39. And this was where the records kind of changed. According to his obituary, he is survived by his brother Tom. And I tried to figure out if, because some historical genealogy records just show Michael, but I'm wondering if Tom was like a brother-in-law, but I couldn't find much on his wife Ruth. So
Okay.
I'm not really sure, but his obituary said it, so we'll repeat it. 'Cause
Sure.
it was in the news.
And if this was back in the 30s and 40s, maybe it just got missed on paper, or
I don't know.
Maybe Tom was the replacement
Sure.
brother. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about Chuck Morgan, and now
Yeah.
let's get into the really fascinating part. So I'm going to take this from here for a little bit.
Yeah,
Are you guys
go
ready?
ahead.
I'm going to tell you about Chuck's first disappearance. First? Yes, his first.
Most of us hope not to ever have
Yeah.
one.
Right? Although if you're going to have a disappearance, it's awesome to make a comeback.
Yeah.
All right. So on March 22nd, 1977, we're in Tucson, Arizona. So we've referenced that he was born in Washington, married Ruth in Idaho. Now we're down in Tucson. Chuck drives his 2 daughters to school and then disappears for 3 days. When he returns home, he wakes his wife Ruth up at about 2 a.m. by stumbling around, the dog's barking outside. So she goes to the front door, she opens it and sees Chuck on the porch. He has his hands zip tied, he's missing a shoe,
So random.
and a plastic handcuff is around one ankle. So my first question, and we're going to hear a little bit about Ruth sprinkled throughout Amy's face. My first question is, it's day 3. Ruth, where have you been?
Well, also, too, so your spouse just goes missing.
Right.
And, I mean, I will say we haven't come across any, missing persons report.
No, or police reports or call.
anything.
Has anyone seen Chuck? I haven't seen Chuck. Anyone? So he's been missing for 3 nights. I mean, you said he was shy. How shy was he? I mean, he just blended into the background. Anyway, he's home. And so he's clearly physically struggling. She brings him inside and he keeps pointing to his throat. So
wait, he's not talking.
no, he's not speaking, which makes sense for a shy guy, but he won't speak. So she asks him a few questions.
Okay, full stop. Really quick for our audience. Your spouse goes missing for 3 days.
If you notice.
And they come in at 2 a.m. looking like they had just escaped some sort of, I don't know,
Serious
kidnapping,
incident.
maybe, who knows?
Right.
And they're not going to talk.
No, Ruth just went back to bed. She was like, have a good night, take a shower, I'll see you in the morning. No.
I mean, not really, but.
We do know a little bit about what happens from here because Ruth tells us. So she gets him into the kitchen. She's trying to communicate with him, and she finally asks, can you write? And so she gets him a pen and a piece of paper, and he starts to write. He points to his throat, and then he writes down that his throat has been painted with a hallucinogenic drug.
Stop. What does that even mean?
I don't think anyone knows, including Chuck.
Okay.
So
that sounds made up to me.
it does.
How
and
do you paint a throat? Like the
that's
outside
the part that holds
or
you
the
up.
inside?
Is the method of which it was painted.
I'm just saying, like, what does that even mean, though?
I do not know, but we do know, little spoiler alert, we're going to get into a lot of conspiracy theories here about the CIA, the government, the mob. So what I kind of think it might have been is whomever kidnapped him, assuming he was kidnapped,
Made him drink
told
a
him.
syrup.
Yeah, brought some other substance, right? Poured it down his throat.
We're going to knock you out with NyQuil.
It could be. Yeah, it could have
tell
been
you.
anything. And they told Chuck this is a hallucinogenic drug and it will kill you or get into your system and destroy your nervous system if you speak. Right? I mean,
that would be really scary, honestly.
It would be scary.
Yeah.
But that would also indicate that whomever kidnapped you doesn't want you to talk.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, I don't
True.
know, probably pretty common in a kidnapping. They're like, here, we're going to let you go home. You can take the zip ties, but you can't bring it up.
Did they let him or did he escape?
We don't know.
Okay.
And Ruth doesn't know because she didn't ask.
Ruth.
Just kidding, Ruth. Okay, so Ruth says that she wants to call the police or call a doctor, and Chuck insists that she cannot do that because that would be signing a death warrant for their whole family. So Chuck is returned home. He's scared that this hallucinogenic drug that could ruin his nervous system is in his body and that his family could all be potentially killed.
Okay, Sarah, I got to stop you again. I'm going to ask Justin this question because he's still here listening to
Justin's
this
looking at us
story.
like,
I know.
what?
I know. Okay, you're a husband.
Yep.
You've been kidnapped. Your throat has quote unquote been painted, whatever that means. Will your wife listen to you when you write down, do not call the police? Or do you think she would be like, you're clearly under the drug of hallucinations.
Right,
and
under
I'm
duress.
going to call the police myself.
I don't know if she'd necessarily call the police or at least get a doctor or take me to the hospital
Sure.
to say, if there's something in your system, we probably ought to get this figured out.
Yeah.
And then once we get that figured out, but I can relate. To Chuck, I have
To which part?
I have 6 children.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah.
So this
To which
idea
part?
that even if there is a remote possibilities that something is going to happen to my wife and children,
Of course.
I probably would be erring on the side of caution and saying too little to make sure they stay protected.
Okay, that's a good point.
No, it's an excellent way to get someone to shut up and stay
Yeah.
quiet.
Sure.
Of course. All right. Well, as the next few days go on, Chuck mentions to Ruth that he had been secretly working for the government, and for the last 3 years, he had been helping out. He doesn't go into much more detail than that, but he says that his captors had taken his Treasury ID.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Treasury ID. What would a Treasury ID be, and what would the purpose of it be?
How did they know about a Treasury ID and his wife had never seen it? That was my question.
Right.
Right? He's saying they took my ID. Well, you didn't leave it laying around. You carry it on you all the time. Your wife never found it in your pant pocket. What?
Or were you targeted because someone found out that you were
Yeah.
a secret agent for the Treasury Department? Now, we don't know a whole lot more about this, but this is what Chuck tells Ruth. So Ruth mentions, as she's retelling the story now, so years later, that Chuck had only mentioned to her one time in their marriage that there was money laundering going on.
Like
and
general in the area or that he was involved?
that's a good question. He didn't say specifically that he was involved, but to bring that up and say that and kind of drop it there, I would assume that Ruth would know he has at that point some kind of connection in there. But then again, like Ruth didn't notice he was missing in the first place, so I don't know. All right, so at this point, understandably so, Chuck becomes very paranoid. So he starts wearing a bulletproof vest everywhere he goes.
Okay, so is Chuck totally healed now? So there was no side effects from the hallucinogenic drug?
I'm assuming, I mean,
Okay.
it took him a couple days to recover. It does say that about 3 days later, he was telling Ruth these things.
Okay.
So
No, I'm just wanting
He
clarification
comes back-
for our audience.
yeah, he comes back to life. A lot of sources that I listened to said that she nursed him back to health, dropping water in his throat using a baby dropper. And I
Like
just
an
did not
eyedropper?
think that was relevant. Yeah. So, but maybe it was.
I mean,
So
she was committed to his health even though she didn't
Yeah, she felt bad for not
Call
noticing
the
he was missing for 3 days, so she made it up to him by dropping water into his mouth. All right, he's wearing a bulletproof vest, and he insists on driving his children to school. Only him. He's the only one that can do it every single day.
Okay, I'm going to stop again and turn to Justin. Okay, you have just been kidnapped. Nursed back to health. Are you going to want to drive your children to school and be the only one that can pick them up and drive them to school? Or are you going to be like, it's not safe to be with me?
I live in my basement now.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? Regardless of what I want, what would I do? I don't think I'd want them with me
In your
or
car.
in my car or...
That's
That's
what I
interesting.
thought when I was reading it, but I'm not a dad. So
I
wanted
mean,
a
It's 2024. You can call yourself a dad if you want.
Yeah, but I
You're a
agree.
parent.
Yeah.
That thought process seems a little foreign to me.
Yeah.
I would think I'd want to distance myself a little bit
Interesting.
to keep them safe, to keep them out of harm's way.
Hmm.
But maybe he felt like he was worried about having them out of his sight.
Well, and he
Because
was wearing a
somebody else.
bulletproof vest, but they weren't.
They
He's like,
weren't.
look, if anything goes down.
Hide behind me.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. And it is said multiple times throughout the story's retelling that Chuck was potentially a naive guy. So maybe he felt like that was the best way to protect them, but in all reality, it might not have been, you know?
Yeah. I don't know.
All right. Well, in June, now we're fast forwarding to June 7th, 1977. It's been about 2 months since his kidnapping, and Chuck disappears for the second time. However, right before he disappears, he stops at his parents' home, and he tells them that if anything happens to him, a letter will arrive explaining everything. Apparently, the post office took that day off because no letter ever arrives. So, is this paranoia?
So he said his parents that a letter is going to come and
Yes.
explain everything, but not to his family.
Well, he might have said it to Ruth, and she was too busy
Yeah,
doing something else.
She may have been too distraught to remember.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
That
That.
small
We'll
detail.
give her that. No letter ever appears, though. So,
Interesting.
9 days later, our girl Ruth receives a phone call from someone, a woman, who identifies herself only as Green Eyes. Green Eyes says, Chuck is all right. Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8. And this is all the information that Ruth gets. And again, it's been 9 days since Chuck went missing, and a woman named Green Eyes calls, and Ruth is like, oh, let me go grab Chuck. He's right here. Oh, it's day 9. I haven't seen Chuck.
Also, like, did he have a history of just, I mean, other than that one time, like, hey, I'm going to go out and get some milk, but...
I do not, never came back. Went out for cigarettes. He doesn't even
Yeah,
smoke.
I don't know.
I don't know. There is, though, like you said, no police reports or records. As far as we know, she's not like panicking, calling everyone. Now, we're telling a story that happened a long time ago, so
In the
maybe there was
70s?
some kind
Yeah,
of,
I don't know.
she did signal an alarm. But either way, she's home to take a phone call from a strange woman named Green Eyes. All right? So I did get all of the scriptures and the verses right there from Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8. It's a little bit long, and ultimately at the
It's
end
8
of
verses
this,
long?
yeah, it's 8 verses 1 through 8. It doesn't provide any clues for the resolution of this case. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but there's a lot of hinting at like death, kind of the end of being.
Well, I think
Amy's going to translate Ecclesiastes for us.
No, I am not a biblical scholar, but we're not a lot of things on this podcast, as we've already said.
We'll add that to the list.
Yeah. But to me, it's just like understanding your mortality, that you're now on your way. There's a reckoning for everybody, and you're on your way to meet your maker, is how I kind of read through the verses.
That's a great interpretation. Verse number 7 says, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to note really quickly that this scripture was pulled from the King James Version. And so it's possible that there was some more context in a different version.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. Are you guys ready for
Yeah.
this? All right. Hold on to your seat here.
How are you, Justin?
I'm good.
You all right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Quite honestly, it's really a fascinating story.
It is. On June 18th, 1977, just 2 days after the mysterious phone call from Green Eyes to Ruth. So now we're on day 11. Ruth still is at home just watching Oprah. Chuck was found near his car in the desert, approximately 40 miles southwest of Tucson. Chuck was found dead. He had been shot one time behind the ear. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about what they found at the scene when they discovered his body. Okay, there's a lot of very unusual and odd things found at the scene. So they find his Mercury Cougar, so his vehicle that he drove to the site, and this vehicle was modified so that it could be unlocked from the fender. I don't know anything more about that. I have no idea what exactly that means.
We're getting a lot of
But it
looks
pops
from our
up.
audio people.
Yeah, so many people want to explain to me right now what that means, but it doesn't come up again in our story. So also in his vehicle, there's a handwritten note with directions to the site that Chuck was murdered, and this was in Chuck's handwriting. There was a set of sunglasses that were unknown. They did not belong to Chuck. According to his family, they were not his, all right? There were multiple weapons and different kinds of ammunition. There was a CB radio, and in the back seat, there was a handkerchief, and wrapped inside it was one of Chuck's teeth.
Like that had recently been pulled out, or we don't know.
I don't know. I would assume because it comes up a lot in the story. Like every retelling of the story talks about the tooth, and nobody ever says like it was freshly pulled. There was gum attached to it or blood.
He was waiting for the tooth fairy.
He was waiting for the tooth. Yeah, I don't know if he flossed too hard on his way down in his Cougar to go meet somebody. I don't know, but there was a tooth there. His gun was also found on the ground nearby him, and he himself was wearing a belt with a knife inside the buckle. So he was trying to protect himself, right? Because he's also wearing his bulletproof vest. Now, you wear a bulletproof vest on your body.
But then shoot yourself in the back of the head.
Well, hang on. Hang on. So the gun is a .357 Magnum. Okay, it does belong to Chuck, and it's found nearby his body. It is determined that the gun was shot approximately 12 inches from his head, okay? And there are no fingerprints found, no fingerprints on the gun. However, investigators find gunpowder residue on his hands. Now, here's where we're going to go bonkers. The gun was found next to his left hand, and there's gunpowder residue on his left hand. But, Amy, what do we know about Chuck?
I don't know if Chuck is right-handed. I know that we'll find out later on that someone else was right-handed.
Chuck was right-handed. You're correct. So at this point, the investigators decide that the most logical explanation for all of the stuff that we found is that Chuck completed suicide.
Oh.
Right. So he's
12 inches behind
right-handed.
his own head with his left hand is what you're telling me.
Yes. So he drives out to the site. He whips out his go-go gadget arm.
He drives 40 miles into the desert after he's been missing for almost 2 weeks.
Right. And he's flossing really hard as he goes.
Waiting for the tooth fairy.
He arrives at the scene and then gets his gun out, puts it in his opposite hand than his dominant hand. Like I said, extends his go-go gadget arm all the way out so it can go 12 inches behind his head and shoots a bullet into his skull.
And then wipes off the gun to have no fingerprints.
Right. He had a few minutes in between. Sure. Yeah.
Died.
Yeah.
Okay.
So none of this, I mean, what we're getting at, it's pretty obvious. None of this is logical, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why would you be wearing a bulletproof vest, but then you attempt to take your own life and you succeed by shooting yourself in the head? It makes no sense. Or do you just have really bad aim and your bulletproof vest wasn't working that day, maybe bounced off? It's illogical, right? So many of the officers from the police department that investigated this did think that it was a murder. Rightfully so. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been ruled a suicide.
A hit of some sort.
Sure. But according to our friend and journalist, Don Devereaux, who we'll tell you about later, but Don Devereaux discovers that many of the officers who had stated that they felt it was a murder and that the suicide theory was illogical actually ended up leaving the police department. Mm-hmm. And 2 of them actually moved out of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Now.
Riddle me that.
Yes.
We're going to get into my most exciting part of this telling. Okay, are we ready? The most odd thing that was found at the scene of Chuck's murder,
Other than his body.
other than all of the things that I just said, was a $2 bill clipped inside his underwear with some mysterious riddles written in Chuck's handwriting on the $2 bill. Now, we are going to get into this part of our story right here that I call the Surprise Amy segment. Amy does not know what I'm about to tell her right now.
I never know.
This
really,
is one of my
truthfully.
favorite parts. And because Justin is here as well, I'm going to shock both of you. So I brought with me a bunch of $2 bills.
Oh, look at you.
I know, I have a big old stack. Don't tell anyone when I live, because where I live, I don't want this to get robbed. But I have a bunch of $2 bills because when I was growing up, my grandmother, Cornier, may she rest in peace, for our birthdays would give us all a $2 bill because it's a little unusual and odd, right? Now, you just get to stare at this lovely bill, and you have to give it back to me at the end. But I'm going to go into this bill and why it's so important, okay? Amy, why don't you found a photo of the $2 bill.
I did.
And some information. So I'm actually going to ask you to tell us what's drawn on this bill.
Sure. Okay, so on the front of the bill, so there's serial numbers to the left-hand side if you're familiar with what a $2 bill is. And it was written, Ecclesiastes 12 was written above, and then there was 2 arrows because there was a 1 and an 8 in the serial number, and they were marked with arrows that kind of went curved up and curved down, if that makes sense.
Amy, where have we heard Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8?
Ruth and Green Eyes.
Ruth and Green Eyes.
And then, still on the front side of the bill, to the left-hand side, there were 7 Spanish names that were written under Ecclesiastes. And they were written in English, alphabetical order, A to G.
Go ahead and read them, Amy.
Oh my gosh. Do you know Spanish, Justin?
Some.
Okay,
Ooh.
here.
Oh, you're
I'm
gonna make me
have
read these.
Justin read them.
You have to participate. This is a participation podcast.
All right. Whoa. Acevedo, Bejarano, Cajero, Duarte, Encinas Fuente, and Gradilla.
Wow.
Yeah, not just a little. Justin knows Spanish.
Justin nailed it. All right, so these names are in order. All right, what's next?
On the back side of the bill, if you flip it over, there's the signatories of the Declaration of Independence in the scene. And some of them were numbered 1 through 7 that corresponded with
The people in the picture, in the photo.
picture.
In the
also,
painting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's also there's the 7, A through G is also 1 through 7. So, you could theorize that a number was associated with each person. I don't know. Okay. So also on the backside, there was a drawing that can be interpreted as a roughly drawn map. And this is different from the drawing that was the directions that were found in Chuck's car.
Okay.
If you're still following. Okay. Investigators believe that the map led to an area between Tucson and Mexico. And the towns of Robles Junction and I'll have Justin read the Spanish name. It's right there.
Salacity.
All right. We'll go he was going to do as good as I was. But, okay, we're marked on the crude map. They were both known for smuggling, and police say the map led to an airstrip. Now, this airstrip was possibly being used to smuggle narcotics and other things from Mexico to the U.S.
Wow, so we've got quite the mystery on our hands right here. All right, so you guys are both looking at a $2 bill in front of you. Now, Amy, I want to know before I tell you the next part, what you think. A lot of people who have studied this case believe that it's a map, right?
Sure.
That will provide information for illicit or illegal activity. So what do you think?
Obviously, it's pinned to his underwear. He took the time. We're assuming that this was all written in his handwriting. I don't know that
one of the sources I found said his handwriting.
And so I'm assuming that it either had to do with some sort of cipher or code that if you had the right text or document or whatever, you could kind of uncover what he was trying to say in this.
Okay. All right. Justin?
I don't understand if you're going to go through all this and keep it with yourself. Like, why not just write the letter you talked about? And
Sure. Oh, yeah. This is a great point.
Be really clear with what you're talking about with these names and this map. And
I mean,
because
if
that's
you're
a pretty
gonna,
broad area that
it
you're going to go look
is.
at. If you're going to go look at it, it's between two cities.
All right. Okay. I'm liking this.
Yeah.
Anything else, Amy?
No.
Okay. So, again, a lot of people that have studied this case believe that it's some type of a map, right, that leads to, again, the direction or the discovery of something illegal or illicit. And I did find one source that said something very interesting. He said that it makes the most sense to me that this is some kind of a key or a cipher, and that we have not discovered the missing piece.
Yeah. The document or book or whatever.
Right. The solution to this mysterious $2 bill. So, and I think that's brilliant. Like, there's probably a way to decode this, but that document has never been discovered. Okay?
I'm going to stop you, and I'm just going to
Go
ask
ahead.
Justin a question. So, Justin, do any of these names, when you were reading them, interpret into English, like the founding fathers, like last names or first names?
Nothing stands out.
Nothing really stands out. I mean, the closest one, you look at Bejarano, you're like, well, that's sound kind of Benjamin, right? Benjamin Franklin's one of the signers, but no, there's nothing in here that you think looks familiar or close to someone's name.
Okay. So we have this very mysterious $2 bill that could be a map or a cipher. There's probably a way to decode it that's somewhere missing. Maybe it's on a $3 bill. We don't know. There's no missing, or there's no piece that we've been able to find. So I have a surprise theory for you.
I'm excited.
Our surprise Amy segment. And surprise Justin, too. I mean, he's like
He's
very
just
surprised.
along for this ride.
On the $2 bill, there's a recreation of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And like Amy said, 7 of these men are numbered in order, 1 through 7. So, Amy, can you read me the names of the men who were present at the signing of the Declaration in this picture?
So we have John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert R. Livingston, Roger Sherman, John Adams, and Samuel Adams.
Okay, thank you. So, Robert Livingston was present at the signing of the Declaration, but he was not a signator. He was on timeout that day. I have in my notes. He didn't get to sign it. They ran out of paper.
Yeah.
I don't know. However, all of the men that we just referenced that are in this depiction were relevant or notable men in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, okay? So Chuck had these names numbered, which would give you an order, right? Number 1, number 2, number 3. If you take a look at a map of Tucson, Arizona,
What?
you will find East Hancock Vista, West Franklin Street.
No way.
This is crazy.
Stop it, Sarah, right now. I'm dying.
Hang on. South Jefferson Avenue, South Livingston Drive, South Sherman Avenue, and an East Adams Street and a West Adams Street. Now, when I say east, west, south, right, that's not the name of the street. That's like the directional. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
So we have Hancock Vista, Franklin Street, Jefferson Avenue, Livingston Drive, Sherman Avenue, Adams Street, west and south, or west and east, excuse me. And you guys, I verified this myself.
Really?
I researched every one of them. All right.
Do they all meet?
So here's the trick to that. Once this case had been worked through years later, and armchair detectives, if we call them, are like trying to solve this mystery, it has not been solved, but it has been noted, and this is a great point, that the geological terrain of Tucson, Arizona has changed significantly since 1977 or 1970, whenever Chuck started writing this code. So if you draw a map, a line between all of these streets, there's no exact location that it would end at. However, what part of Livingston? All the way up here, or is it all the way over here, right?
Yeah.
And there are businesses, homes, parks, gathering places that could have changed since then. And so present day, as we can apply like the names to the street names that correlate, there's no like final destination spot between all of them that's been discovered yet. But get a load of that.
That's wild. I was not expecting that.
I know you weren't. Surprise Amy segment.
But he was an escrow officer. Did he do transactions on these streets?
That's a good point,
Right?
though. He was familiar with the streets.
Yeah.
This area, these were their properties. Was he trying to identify his transactions?
I'll tell you guys what I think might have been at the end of the map, the pot of gold, if you will. I'll tell you later on. So the last thing that I want to note in relation to the $2 bill, Chuck was well known to be a Freemason.
Yes.
Now, we don't have time to go into the details of the Freemasons. That would be a separate podcast. But we do know a little bit. So just a quick background. It's known to be an exclusive secret society of oath-bound men who are devoted to fellowship, brotherhood, moral discipline, and keeping and maintaining the law of the land. Okay? Many of our founding fathers of our government were known to be Freemasons, such as John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, Robert R. Livingston, Roger Sherman, Samuel Adams, and it has always been suspected that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were also members of the Freemasons. However, there is no record of their initiation. But even family members, generationally down the line have come out and said that they were believed to be a part of the Freemasons. Also, in Masonry, if you will, right, within this organization, there is a sacred number. Can you guys guess what that sacred number is?
7.
It is 7. It is said to be comprised of the numbers 3 and 4, which represent a triangle and a square, which are referred to in the society as the perfect shape.
Yeah.
I mean, my perfect shape is curvy, but these guys believe that the square and the triangle that
Together.
equals 7
Yeah.
are sacred. All right. So are your minds blown yet or not?
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
Okay. All right.
We've lost Justin.
No.
Justin's. All right. So all of this stuff that we've just discussed was found on the $2 bill, right? Chuck stated that he was a secret agent for the Treasury. And who runs the Treasury, you guys? They're just looking at me like blindsided because they don't know what's going to come out of my mouth next. The government, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of ties here. And I think it's likely that Chuck, who was a Freemason, right, knew exactly how to use this $2 bill to create a code or story, right? Like, there's no way that works backwards, that he just magically named 7 streets, right? But there's no solid answer yet. I hate to break it to you. There's no solid answer.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I know. Okay, that ends our Surprise Amy segment. That was one of the best 20 minutes of my life. All right, so 2 days after his body was discovered, a woman calls the sheriff's department and identifies herself only as Green Eyes. Now, she tells them that she met up with Chuck prior to his death at the Lamp Post Motel. And that is verified. There is a woman with Chuck. Chuck is at the Lamp Post Motel, and it is seen on camera. Now, the camera's blurry. It was in the 70s, right? However, there is a woman there with him, and investigators did verify that Chuck was staying at the Lamp Post Motel all of the days leading up to his death. So he's hiding out in a motel, guys. Okay? Green Eyes states that she had been there with him at some point or in and out. Again, Ruth, where are you at? Ruth has no clue.
Yeah.
Green Eyes states that he showed her a briefcase containing $60,000 in cash, and it was meant to buy his life back from a hitman who had been contracted to kill him. Now, I used this fancy calculator that we have called the time money converter, which reveals that the $60,000 in cash that he was carrying would be worth approximately $307,000 today.
Oh.
So it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that Chuck's game plan here would be like, okay, I'm going to get $307,000 worth of cash. I'm going to put it in this briefcase. I'm going to meet up with the hitman that I know has a contract out of my life. I'm going to go far out in the desert so nobody hears anything. And I'm going to pay him to not kill me. All right, well.
It's
not a good plan.
It's not a great plan.
The briefcase was not found on him, so assumingly Chuck paid for his own hit.
Twice. I mean, right, he did all the work that got him a a hit taken out in the first place. And now his strategy is to pay the hitman to walk away. And the hitman is like, all right. Or here's what we're going to do, Chuck. I'm going to go ahead and kill you. I'm going to take your briefcase and I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know for sure. But Green Eyes continues a little bit. And she says that she was the one who called Ruth prior to the discovery of his body. So she admits it right there on the phone that she was the one that had called Ruth. But she doesn't give a reason. And to this day, Green Eyes has never been identified. But I'm going to bring Green Eyes up again later because either this girl is like a badass or she's like scary. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bring her up again later. All right. So we have a kidnapping. We have hallucinogenic drugs and paintbrushes, apparently. We've got a murder. We've got a $2 bill with a mystery map on it. We've got a woman named Green Eyes. And as an escrow agent, we're going to now find out that Chuck was involved in many crimes revolving around his business, escrow, right? Money laundering, fraudulently selling land, potentially. Is this why he was killed? You guys, was it a mob hit? Was the U.S. Treasury involved? Was the CIA involved? And we're going to tell you all about that in part 2.
Yes.
So we're going to take a breather so you guys can go like scream and
can process all
yeah,
of the
go think about that for a
information.
minute. And we're going to take a quick sponsor break. Amy, would you go get us a sponsor, please?
I know. I had one last time. It was your
You
turn.
We tried to get the mob to sponsor this episode, but they said no. All right, you guys. I'll see you back here in just a few minutes
All
for part
right.
2 of our story.